we've already jumped into it, and I see that everyone has, is joining us from across the country, and I appreciate it. I am Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square, and I'm so excited to have Mark Jacob joining us. He has been on Lincoln Square before. You've probably seen and read his newsletter, Stop the Presses. You can get on Substack. He's a columnist for Courier Newsroom. And, before that, longtime Metro editor at the Chicago Tribune, my hometown paper. He's also co-authored, is it 10 books?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Of all kinds of history books of various types, from the Revolutionary War to the World War II to basketball, you name it.
Great. And, as someone who's been in journalism for about 25 years, I have to say Mark's takes on the media are just indispensable. And so glad to have you here. I know we have a lot to talk about on the media front.
Sure do.
Starting with what we were chatting about a little bit with the settlement with Paramount and Trump. So news broke late last night that Paramount, which is the parent company for CBS, they reached a $16 million settlement with Trump. And that's over its claim that CBS had deceptively edited a 60 Minutes interview with Vice President Kamala Harris during the 2024 election. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but, legal minds who have looked at this case thought it was laughable. But what is also at stake here is Paramount's merger with Skydance Media and the not at all subtle threat that Trump and his FEC, were making that deal did not have to go through. So basically, the $60 million is going to Trump's future presidential library, just like that plane from Qatar allegedly is. There's kind of a pattern that's forming. So in your estimation, Mark, is this essentially a bribe?
Yeah, it's essentially extortion, where Trump has made it clear to Paramount that he's going to hold up their merger unless CBS agreed to settle a completely bogus lawsuit. And just to be really clear, they were accusing CBS of deceptively editing an interview with Kamala Harris. And the part that they said that they left out, they actually had already broadcasted in another show. So
Right.
it's not like they were trying to hide anything. They were doing what journalists do every day of the week, every hour of every day in the week, which is edit their own interviews. This is a completely idiotic, foolish, silly, no merit to it lawsuit. But if you file a stupid lawsuit like that and you have the ability to cost billions of dollars to the company you're suing, well, then they may have to settle. And that's happened a couple of times. It happened with ABC also with the Stephanopoulos case, where
Right.
in that case he did sort of misstate things, but in an understandable way, because frankly, the judge in that case, this is about the E. Jean Carroll case, where the question was whether the jury had found that Trump had raped her. Well,
Mhm.
the judge said, one of the judges in one of the trials said that under the common definition of rape, yes, it would be rape, but according to New York law, that strict definition, it wasn't.
Right.
So, so the judge in the case, he used the word rape. So,
Yes.
Stephanopoulos used, but it wasn't according to the laws, technically.
Hmm.
But then the thing about that case is that Trump is a public figure. So according to our laws, you do not, in a Supreme Court ruling in Sullivan versus New York Times, you have to prove actual malice or reckless
Hmm.
disregard for the facts if it's a public figure,
Right.
which I think Trump is a public figure.
I
And
would say so.
yeah, so there's that situation where you'd have to prove that, and that's a really high bar. I mean,
Hmm.
and and they wouldn't have been able to prove it. So,
Right.
so, but ABC settled, and the
Right.
ABC didn't explain why they settled. They said
No,
for about the same amount that CBS settled
it was
for.
about 15 million.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Right. And you brought up the Sullivan case, and I think that's interesting because, Clarence Thomas, in particular on the Supreme Court, has made it clear that he wants that law overturned. Do you think that there are enough votes on the Supreme Court to do that?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, there was an opportunity for them to take up a case in the last year that they did not. So I don't think they're ready to do that yet. But it's under threat. I've written about how it's under threat. You do get Thomas for sure doesn't. Well, I mean, Thomas doesn't believe in a lot of things that involve democracy. But it is, yeah. I mean, it's part of the whole assault on on freedom of the press. And and the reason that Sullivan ruling happened was that the judges wisely realized that in order for a free press to report on public figures, it has to have some leeway. That every error of fact, no matter how big or small, that cannot be. You can sue them out of existence.
Right.
And this is the power of this is how powerful people avoid being written about and broadcast about in the American news media is
Yes.
the threat to be able to run people out of business.
Right.
I mean, Peter Thiel ran Gawker out of business, about
Right.
a decade or so ago. I
And
mean, that
and
was a
people at the time were like, "Oh, it's just a gossip website, who cares?" But, for the media writ large, there were huge implications, and we're
right.
seeing that today.
Right, right. And that's what I'm really worried about. I mean, you have this reckless government now that is going to use every bit of its power. They're threatening. CNN just recently ran a story about an app that people are using to say when ICE is in the neighborhood,
Right.
and Kristi Noem and Trump, were indicating yesterday that they may file charges. They said, "Well, we're going to talk to the Department of Justice about whether to charge CNN for writing that story." So, so you have this kind of scary, like Justice Department prosecutors going after news media just to try to to get them to fall in line. But you also have these kind of civil lawsuits, like the one against Paramount where they can sue people out of existence. That's
Yes.
and that has become this is I wrote about this a couple months ago in the Stop the Press's newsletter, how it's kind of ironic in a way that if you look back decades, Republicans were always cranky about frivolous lawsuits and how there's
Mhm.
too many lawsuits being filed and we don't need so many lawsuits, and in the modern Republican Party that's become a primary weapon against against people, and they really and it works too. That's the frightening thing is because them you can they the news media knows that they can be sued out of existence,
Right.
and so it takes real courage for people to report the truth.
Right. And, I've been struck by the fact, I mean, there's been excellent reporting for, this current Trump administration, Wired in particular on the what Doge was up to under Elon Musk.
Right.
But, it's striking how few, really investigative pieces on Elon Musk you see out there because to your point, the news media can be sued out of existence. Elon Musk has, more lawyers than he knows what to do with. And so, that kind of essential function of journalism is directly under threat. Because the fact that, media companies by and large are corporate entities and, they can't afford those kinds of lawsuits. And so the balance of power, even though, as journalists, our profession is enshrined in the Constitution. It's in the First Amendment, which is highly unusual. And that gives us a huge responsibility, to the public.
Right.
But we can't compete, with multi billionaires who can buy and sell anything they want. And
Right.
so, and at the end of the day, this isn't a media problem. This is a democracy problem.
Right, right. And these very powerful people have armies of lawyers. Now it's even especially frightening when those armies of lawyers are paid by the taxpayers in the Justice Department. But even regardless, I mean, Elon Musk sued because people wouldn't advertise on X. I
Right.
mean, that's which is ridiculous. I mean,
What
but
happened to capitalism? People
right,
get to make
right,
their own
right. But what
decisions.
happened to the free enterprise system? The
Right.
idea that if you didn't want to do business with somebody, you didn't have to. Yet I mean, that's the thing. The hypocrisy is just, mind blowing because they don't believe in freedom. They just don't. I mean, that
Peter
sounds,
Thiel has made that rather clear
yeah,
in his
yeah.
interviews. They're not hiding it.
No, no, they now are like embracing this idea that you need a strongman leader or an oligarchy. You need this, this team of, and coincidentally, they're all kind of rich, techie bro people.
Mm,
Gee, I wonder why. And
right.
there's a big strain of sexism and racism and all of this stuff, in all of the Trump stuff. But I just feel like I think that you're going to see more and more of these lawsuits filed against media outlets, and it's only the strongest and the ones who most believe in democracy and the reason for it are going to withstand it. I mean, you're going to, you don't know the stories that you never see. I
Right.
mean, I was in daily newspapering for 40 years, so I know that some stories get written and don't get published. I mean, I've seen it.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes for good reasons, sometimes because you didn't have the facts proved up and stuff like that. But sometimes it's because the powers that be in the news organization are afraid to publish it. And you're going to
Yes.
see more and more of that. That's why corporate ownership of news media is a real problem today. Because, or for example, Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos.
Right.
And for years, people thought, oh, good, he's going to be the white knight. He's going to save the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff Bezos has a lot of other businesses. He's got Amazon, he's got Blue Horizon, he's got, whatever. And he knows that Trump can tank his businesses. That's why he, he stopped. I think that's why he stopped the Washington Post from endorsing Kamala Harris. I think
Yes.
that's why that he donated to Trump's inaugural fund. That's why he was sitting in that row of our oligarchs at the inauguration, which was a really unseemly
Yeah.
message to the public of who matters and who's going to get on board the Trump train.
Right.
And he's even like done that $40 million deal for a documentary about Melania
Right.
Trump, which is give
That
me a
will be on
break.
Amazon Prime. Another
Right.
one of his businesses. Yeah.
Right, exactly. He's got so many businesses, and he knows that they can be sabotaged by Trump. And so he plays along. And so this is why corporate ownership of news media is kind of a problem. And a real good example of getting around that is The Guardian, for example, which
Hmm.
is UK based, but frankly is doing as good reporting on American politics as anyone.
Right.
And they're I believe they're a nonprofit. They're like and they take and these nonprofits that are independent, they may save us. They like ProPublica, places like that.
Right.
And so it's not that all media is bad. I mean, I hate this whole
Hmm.
thing where oh, the media did this, the media did that. I'm not saying all the media is bad. I'm saying that
Right.
there's elements of corporate media, and
Yeah.
I did a bonus column this morning after the Paramount news broke, and I called CBS a quisling of journalism.
I saw
And
that.
the newsletter or column, whatever you want to call it, it lists some others: Washington Post, ABC, the Los Angeles Times, with the owner of the Los Angeles Times wants to be he seems to want to be in the oligarch club, and so
Right. He's another South African billionaire,
right,
and again, did not want his newspaper to endorse Kamala Harris.
exactly. In fact, he told the editorial people to not write about Trump for a while. He said, "Don't write about
And,
Trump."
right. And you see that, this is beyond just corporate ownership. I mean, you're really seeing the meddling in the editorial process there. All of us who, were part of the media, in a different time, we knew that there was a huge line between advertising, business, and editorial. Those lines have been totally obliterated by these billionaires. They're meddling in everything. Jeff Bezos has changed the entire direction of the Washington Post editorial board. You can't say mean things about Trump. You
Right,
can't, question the free market. And, that's what we notice. But that these decisions are being made in much smaller media outlets as
right,
well.
right,
I mean, you have the corporate media structure, which we know, has its flaws when it comes to protecting democracy. But we also have, a rise in nonprofit media, which has been very positive, but they're dependent on the Trump IRS for the tax code.
Right.
Trump can come after them too. And so there's an incentive for them to also put the kibosh on their, reporting on Trump as well. And so, I've spent a couple decades, in corporate nonprofit media, but, I'm really inspired by the kind of independent media that, Courier is a part of, Lincoln Square is a part of, because we don't have billionaire owners. We're not dependent on Trump for anything. And so we won't bend a knee. And to me, that's what needs to be done right now.
Right. Oh, amen. No, but he will still attempt to intimidate anyone. I mean, you look at what's happening with universities, with law firms, with there was a kind of an amazing sentence. I don't know if I can find it, but in the New York Times story, I woke up really early this morning and ran across the news about what was happening with Paramount. And the New York Times story has a paragraph that says the deal is the clearest sign yet of Mr. Trump's ability to intimidate major American institutions that it extends to the media industry too. Yeah, yeah, it does, and it's sad and true, is what that is. But he's going after every institution of society that can oppose him, that can have a different view from him, that is not going to play into his whole kleptocracy, and it is very frightening. And we need to celebrate the heroes for one thing. I mean, and there are some, and we need to, like in the kind of bonus newsletter I just put out, I mentioned, people are doing a good job
Mhm.
because we can't forget that. And, I mentioned The Guardian and ProPublica, they're two shining lights, but there are others. You mentioned. Those we need to stay strong, and we need and people need to be discerning about their media. It's the thing that's so frustrating about the Washington Post in particular is I think most of the first Trump administration, maybe all of it, the Washington Post was better than the New York Times.
I agree.
The Washington Post was doing a terrific job. And even today, and I canceled the Washington Post. I'm told I had prepaid for it, so I still get it, but I don't trust it anymore. I canceled it after Bezos did that thing where he's only going to let editorial people write about free markets. And, that just shows a signal to me that he's putting his thumb on the scale. And so I canceled it, but I still get it because it hasn't run out yet. Like someone told me that I could like send an email and they would just, they would give me a refund. So I need to do that. But the frustrating thing about the Washington Post to me is there's still good reporters there. I mean,
Yeah.
many people have fled. Ann Telnis, the terrific cartoonist, she fled because they wouldn't run her cartoon that mentioned Bezos. I mean, there are a lot of people who have left the Washington Post.
Bruce Marcus,
Yeah.
Eugene Robinson, Jeff
Jennifer,
Sargent left,
right.
well before. Yeah.
Greg Sargent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Jennifer Rubin.
Yes.
But that's what's frustrating is that they are still breaking stories. They still have news reporters who are breaking stories. Now, again, because of the ownership, that my level of trust in that news outlet is diminished severely. But it's frustrating, I mean, I've worked for bad media owners. In fact, I've worked for bad media owners more than good media owners, because that's the frustrating thing about journalism today.
Yeah.
But so it's just you have to. It's hard to know when to declare a news outlet dead to you. But some of them have they've capitulated so badly, like CBS in this case, that you have to consider just deciding to say goodbye to them. And
Right.
another thing that just to point out that I've been thinking about is that it's Trump really is. I keep on saying that don't view MAGA as a political movement. View it as an organized crime outfit, because it's really because they're interested in money and power and nothing else. Any of the issues that they put forward are all for very cynical reasons, and they're not consistent. I mean, they like Russia now, and stuff like that. If there's just so
Mhm.
many things that the old Republican Party would have just, been shocked at,
Right.
you know. And so viewing it as this kind of mafia style operation really makes everything come into, clearer focus, and it's really we're in a frightening position, and for the media, bravery is required. Not,
Yes.
and not and while we're at it talking about this, I just want to mention the New York Times, which is in a place all by itself. I mean,
Hmm.
and I criticize the New York Times a lot, mostly because not that they're wrong, and not that they're not saying that Trump is an autocrat, except they're not using the word autocrat.
Right.
They're calling him a maximalist or something
Right.
like that. They are purposely using what I call weasel wording
Right.
to.
And nobody knows what the word maximalist,
No, I had to look it up.
means. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and the thing about it, it means somebody who is going to push forward their agenda without asking anyone's permission.
Hmm.
And in a democracy, if you're head of a democracy and you're a maximalist, that means you're an authoritarian.
Right.
And so why not use the word? They don't call him an authoritarian. They don't call him a would-be dictator. Both of which are absolutely accurate based on so much evidence, increasing evidence. They don't. They often they won't call him, liar. They will say that he lied about the 2020 election, but
Hmm.
mostly they call him untethered to truth and stuff like that.
Yes. Which takes a lot more words, which,
Yes,
is kind of against one of the first principles about journalism. Be very clear
right,
and,
right.
brief.
Well, and the word lie is, yes, a beautiful short word that everyone knows what it means.
Right.
My favorite of all time is when the New York Times said that Vivek Ramaswamy shows a penchant for dispensing with the facts. So it wasn't that he lied. Well, I mean, they actually said he lied later in the story, but the headline had to be cutesy about it,
Yeah.
and that's not as bad as as paying Trump millions of dollars, but they're normalizing what's
Yes.
abnormal behavior. They're making people think that this is not a five-alarm fire. And I'm telling you, you know this, and I think that the people watching this know this. It's a five-alarm fire. This is the closest to a dictatorship this country has ever become. And
Yes.
Trump has 3.5 more years if we ever have another election. That's another thing. I mean, do you know what? I'm not even confident we'll have midterms because of all this stuff. I mean, look, every day there's something that shows, this latest congressional bill is a gigantic increase in the budget for ICE. So we're going to have
Yes.
so it's to bring us closer to a police state and an incarceration state. And he's talking about like deporting the homegrowns. You know
Right.
what that means? That means U.S. citizens.
Right.
I mean, so there's
It's whoever he deems to be an enemy.
right, exactly. This is scary time. It is push the button, five-alarm fire, do everything you can to stop it, which is why, and I don't want to be depressing about this. I mean, I think the news media has failed in its job overall to warn the American public about this. They've normalized it. They've
Right.
used it for entertainment, with that like alligator Alcatraz crap. They view it as amusing. They've been amused by Trump.
Right.
I saw one of the New York Times top editors was on MSNBC when I was watching a few months ago, and she said, "Well, Trump is entertaining," and my head blew up because he's not entertaining. He's frightening. He's scary.
Yeah, he's not entertaining if your child is trans. He's not
Right.
entertaining if, you are a naturalized citizen, but all of a sudden your citizenship may be called into question.
Right, right, right. I mean, and there's no stopping. I mean, there really is no stopping. He's going after the most vulnerable people now, but where will it end? I
Right.
mean, yeah, I mean, and so the news media, it's to me, I also liken it um, to coverage of a hurricane. As you know, with that, and the news media, their job when a hurricane is about to hit is to say, "Hey, the hurricane's about to hit. Move to high ground. Be careful, a hurricane." Their job is not to say, "Well, it's a hurricane. We've had a lot of hurricanes over the years. We don't know if it'll be a bad one or a good one. It's normal. Hurricanes are
Right.
normal. Don't worry about it." And then this is what the New York Times has done. New York Times coverage of Trump has been better since he came in and slashed and burnt. So they are covering the wreckage of the hurricane way better than they covered the impending hurricane. So
Which they downplayed all the
right,
potential damage from, and instead said, "Hey, the little drizzle that is coming from the
right,
Biden administration, that seems kind of like a hurricane too."
right, right, because it's all just politics. It's all
Right.
just and And so, I mean, let's just boil it all down to what is the duty of the American news media. It is to make people's lives better by informing them of threats to their well-being, showing them opportunities and things that will make their life better through information. That is their job. And if Trump isn't a threat to our well-being, then nothing
Right.
is. And
Yeah.
and for them to not see, the thing about the New York Times is I'm really not convinced they believe in democracy. And the thing is, they wouldn't really be around if free press is. I mean, as we've talked about, the press has a special place in our Constitution, in our democracy. But yet, I think that they've decided that, that would be putting our thumb on the scale. That's be
Hmm.
partisan. We don't want to. So I just don't think they believe in democracy. I think that their view, they said it last year before the election. Joe Kahn, the editor, executive editor, said that, well, democracy is one of our issues, but it's not the top one. And it's like, it's really, I mean, or look what's here we are a year later. It's not your top one. It
Right.
wasn't your top one before this last election, really. And so I think my feeling is that the New York Times has just decided they're chronicling the facts and what's going on, and they don't have any opinion on it.
Hmm.
They don't have any preference for democracy over dictatorship. I
Well,
think that
if
that's what they decided.
we can look at their historic coverage, back during the Hitler era. I mean, it was the same kind of normalization
Right.
and downplaying of the threat,
Yeah. Go yeah,
Um,
go look it up, audience, because the New York Times, the first ever mention of Adolf Hitler in the New York Times, said that his anti-Semitic rhetoric was really just something to gain attention, and he was
mhm.
not serious about it. They absolutely said he was not serious about being anti-Semitic.
Yeah,
Well,
and
how
it's
did that turn out?
exactly. The New York Times kind of takes this, proudly elitist stance, like, we're above everything, don't get hysterical, we know what's going on, we're very savvy. And, that kind of attitude, which was once, maybe annoying, is now
Mm.
extremely damaging
Right.
because,
Right.
you can see the destruction all around us. Something that I thought a lot about in the 2020 election, but particularly in the 2024 election, was how can any newspaper endorse Donald Trump when he is so opposed to our interest? Just take aside all of his other politics, but just, as the media, we have our own interests. We have the First Amendment. He's a direct threat to that. He has threatened the free press in every which way that you can. And so, just out of sheer self interest, for these corporations that are supposed to make money, it doesn't make sense on its face to ever endorse Donald Trump. And that's something that I know my colleagues in the media kind of would look at me and say, "What are you talking about?" But, if we can't stand up for the free press, how are we supposed to expect anyone, to trust us?
Right.
We're not even willing to stand up for our own rights.
Right. I think a lot of newspapers didn't endorse Trump, but they didn't endorse anyone, or a
Mhm.
lot of newspapers have gotten away from endorsements. And
Yeah,
but
and I know there's a big debate, like, do endorsements really matter and all that, but, they
well,
are significant.
yeah, I think it's another voice. It's a voice, a
Mhm,
trusted voice, that has a historical perspective. And so, I went back and I wrote a newsletter about why don't newspapers do page one editorials against Trump. And I went back and looked at page one editorials over the years, and you see hardly any of them anymore. You used to see a lot of them. There was one newspaper in New Hampshire that did a page one editorial denouncing I think it was Miss New Hampshire for coming out for gay rights, back in
mhm,
the day. So I mean, there have been some silly reasons for page one editorials, but there have also been some serious ones. The New York Times did one, like, 5 or 6 years ago about gun violence,
mhm.
but you don't see them coming out across their front page and across the top of their website and saying, this guy's a danger. You can't vote for him. The New York Times endorsed Harris, but they did it fairly quietly. They did it the kind of way that they do in a normal situation. Again, this is This is the biggest crisis for America since the Civil War. This is a frightening situation in which we may be consigning our children and grandchildren to live in a dictatorship. It's that simple. That's not, and the thing about it is that's not paranoia or hyperbole. Oh,
Mhm.
if you think it is, you just woke up from a 5-month nap, because
Right.
what he's been doing is frightening. I mean, you look at the Justice Department is chasing after, Jack Smith and people like that who investigated Trump. I mean, they're investigating the investigators, which is always a
Right.
scary
The
sign.
the prosecutors of the J6 thugs,
Right,
who, went to prison, they're all being fired just for
right.
doing their jobs.
Well, and some of the J6 thugs are getting hired by the government. You
Right.
know,
Not that we know who, they are, if they're ICE agents, because they're
right,
masked and they won't
right.
show their identification. But yeah, and even some of them have, cushy jobs within the White House.
But so yeah, I mean, it couldn't be scarier. And for
Yes.
people to like minimize it as a mistake,
Hmm.
but I just want to say about this that it's not it's not over yet. It's not one of those things where people need to not say, "Oh hell, I can't do anything about it. I feel helpless." Don't feel helpless.
Right.
Don't feel helpless. We had millions of people show up a few weeks ago for street protests.
For the No
We'll have
Kings protests
Yeah,
all across the country.
we will have more showing up next time. We will, it's and the thing about it is we don't have the Supreme Court. I'm not when I say we, I'm not even talking about the Democrats. I
Right.
criticize Democrats too. When I say we, I'm talking about democracy defenders. I'm talking
We the
about people
people.
people who believe in democracy. And we don't have the Supreme Court or majority in the Supreme Court. Uh, I feel so sorry for those three women who
Right.
are I mean, can you imagine sitting through that crap every day? It would drive me nuts. But so we don't have the Supreme Court. We do not have the White House. We don't have either house of Congress. And who knows whether we'll have an election to try to get the House back. But we do have people power. And that actually can make a difference. It's made a difference in other countries. In this country, it could mean it sends a signal to these
Right.
cowardly lawmakers, for example, that there will be consequences if they do the wrong thing. So
Right.
it's important to scare the cowards who are in Congress. And it also, we need to send a signal to the White House that they can't get away with everything and that people are going to confront them. And would I rather have the army or people power? I don't know. I mean, the truth is the army's got the guns, but the people power can be significant and
Yes.
and in millions of people. And so, get involved. Now's the time to get active. And if you don't get active now, when? When are you going to do that? I
This is
mean,
the time.
this
Yes.
is the time. This is among our last chances. I mean, our best chance was in the last election,
Yes.
and that didn't happen. So it's scary, and we're in big trouble.
Right.
We're in big ass trouble. We are. But it's not over yet, and people can fight. You've seen this, and there are a lot of good people who, this is not even the thing about it is it's not even a majority who's running these things. It's not.
No.
I mean, it's not. It's it is a minority plus a giant propaganda machine called Fox News plus many other propaganda machines.
And
Yeah,
fueled by billionaires who can
right.
fund all of it. Yeah.
Exactly.
But
It's
they're
not even.
not the majority, and
No.
Trump's
It's
numbers are sinking, and that's why. And we
right.
can, we have the right to protest. We have the First Amendment. While we still have it,
Right.
let's fight for
Use
it.
it. Yeah, use it. Yeah, I mean, and you get involved. I mean, there are a lot of ways. There's the 5051 50501 group, which organizes protests. You'll find them online.
Mhm.
Indivisible is a great group.
Yes.
Uh, there are a lot of indivisible chapters in local areas that you can
Mhm.
join, and they're very practical. They'll tell you things you can do, how to contact your congressman, that kind of stuff. And so, get active. I mean, your future generations deserve that. They deserve the freedom that is now being taken away from us. And so, I think we owe it to other generations. We owe it to the future of this country.
Yes. And there are protests that are coming up. July 4th is Friday.
Right.
There will be a protest near you. The next No Kings protests are scheduled in a couple of weeks. So there are lots of ways to get involved. I will, tell you that Lincoln Square is a great place to get involved if you
Right.
want to, be a free subscriber, paid subscriber. We appreciate it. I know that Mark's newsletter, is a great place to get your information from. You can find him on Courier. You can subscribe to him on Substack.
Right.
It's the Stop the Presses newsletter. But,
It,
it's
it's
more
just to throw it in. It's stop the press is all one word. .news is the best way to get to it.
perfect. And, I think what we have realized with all of these threats is that, Mark and I come from traditional journalism where you're not supposed to advocate, it's just facts. And there are so many people who are still doing that critical reporting. I know, Courier does that. We do that, Lincoln Square, but we do go beyond that because there is the threat to our basic rights, to our country. And we're involved in the fight. We want you to be involved in it because, we want there to be a country left to fight for. These are not normal times, where a couple decades ago, it was fine to just give you the headlines. Now we're all under threat. And so we appreciate, building this community is important because that's something that we have that MAGA doesn't have, because we care about this country. And frankly, we need to care about each other.
Right. Right. Exactly. It's a positive movement for decency.
Yes. And we definitely need more decency. And Mark, I know we've spent so much time talking about so many important issues. I'm really hoping that you can come back because I wanted to talk to you about the fire hose of lies from the Trump administration. I want to talk about this issue where now we're talking about alligator Alcatraz, like the one beautiful bill. We just
Right.
keep using the right wing's terms for
Right.
everything. This has been going on for decades. So yes, if you would come back, we have so much more that we could talk about.
Yeah. Invite me back. I'd love to. It was great.
Great. Thank you so much. And where is the best place to find you on social media?
Well, I'm on Blue Sky, under Mark Jacob, just with my name. So you'll find it that way. And I'm mostly on Blue Sky. I got rid of, I abandoned X because I didn't want to, create content for a horrible person.
Yeah.
I'm on Threads, but not very active because there's another horrible person who's another oligarch who sucked up to Trump.
Mhm.
Blue Sky's the best for me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate everybody joining us this morning.